It's a story that deserves even more time than we have allotted for it. At first, when I was reading this story, I was annoyed by it and even ridiculed it. But the more I thought about it and the more I read of it, the more angry I got. The story I'm referring to is an article published by The Atlantic titled, "Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty." So the author of the article starts off describing an anecdote about being semi-hostile about wearing masks and social distancing when they were hiking with their kid early on during the pandemic. She goes on to write, "These precautions were totally misguided. In April of 2020, no one got coronavirus from passing someone else while hiking. Outdoor transmission was vanishingly rare. Our cloth masks made out of old bandanas wouldn't have done anything anyway. But the thing is, we didn't know." So before I go on any further, I want to note that the author of this article really downplays the actions that were taken when we didn't know what was going on. So while we discuss the rest of this article, Andy, I want you to just play in the background with no sound or anything, just clips of the most authoritarian things that you can find that occurred over the last 3 years. So some of the things that the author points out in this article is that probably closing down schools for that long, it was probably too long, or promoting one vaccine over the other may have turned out to be misguided because certain vaccines were more effective than others. What she doesn't discuss is beaches being shut down, people being arrested for paddle boating by themselves. She doesn't discuss people dying by themselves because loved ones weren't allowed to visit, or funerals that were canceled because they weren't allowed to take place. She doesn't mention the police that were ordered to break up parties and arrest people for gathering in groups larger than 5. She doesn't mention the children as young as 2 that were forced to wear masks, or families kicked off planes because they couldn't get their child to wear an ineffective face mask. She doesn't mention the crackdowns on protesters or the government confiscating bank accounts of protesters. She doesn't mention the businesses and livelihoods that were destroyed by the government lockdowns, or the people suffering today from the economic disruption stemming from the government lockdowns. None of this is mentioned, but it's all just supposed to be forgiven because, we didn't know. So instead, she says, the people who got it right for whatever reason may want to gloat. Those who got it wrong for whatever reason may feel defensive and retrench into a position that didn't accord with the facts. All of this gloating and defensiveness continues to gobble up a lot of social energy and to drive the culture wars, especially on the internet. These discussions are heated, unpleasant, and ultimately unproductive. In the face of so much uncertainty, getting something right had a hefty element of luck. And similarly, getting something wrong wasn't a moral failing. Treating pandemic choices as a scorecard on which some people racked up more points than others is preventing us from moving forward. And she ends the article by saying, "The standard saying is that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, but dwelling on the mistakes of history can lead to a repetitive doom loop as well. Let's acknowledge that we made complicated choices in the face of deep uncertainty, and then try to work together to build back and move forward." So, Jim, do you have it in your heart to just let bygones be bygones and declare amnesty? What do you think?
No. To hell with that. This is very triggering for me. In fact, the people watching the live stream right now, I put this video clip together of just a few examples of the madness we all lived through during COVID. I mean, we were traumatized as a society, and there was one side or one political party, perhaps, our ruling class, the Democratic ruling class in this country, were the ones imposing all of this madness upon us. And no, I'm not. And I think, we were traumatized as a society, and most people, and I think myself included, when you go through trauma, you try to just forget about it. You compartmentalize it. And so that you don't want to remember some of the crazy stuff that happened, all to keep us safe from a virus in which hardly, not even 1% of people that got it perished. that the flu, especially for children, is more deadly than COVID-19 proved to be. And for all of this, and so it was all lies. And it was an experiment on how much control a society can actually exert on its own people. And there has been no reckoning. There's been no reckoning on this video clip. There's just one example, and I could have spent all day finding even more examples. It could have been all. If I had a week, it would be running on a loop for about 48 hours just of the madness of what happened during COVID. There was a video clip of an old woman in a nursing home, obviously in her last days. That's why you go to a nursing home, and she is. Her family is visiting her through the window, and she can't really see them through the window. And she's clutching a picture of her grandchildren because she loves them. And she says, "Can you come inside?" And they say, "We can't." And she just holds her head and begins to weep. That was done. It was not necessary to be done. The science did not back up stuff like that for being done. That is unimaginably cruel on a grand scale. Just that one thing that happened, that people weren't allowed to visit their dying relatives in nursing homes. That was done on purpose. And there's been no accounting for that. There's been no apology for that. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, now deposed governor of New York, wasn't run out of office because he put thousands of elderly people back into nursing homes where they would get COVID and die instead of keeping them in the hospital, or using the emergency hospitals, the hospital ship off the shore of New York City that Donald Trump sent there for those purposes. No, let's put all the old people back into the nursing homes without protection where they will get COVID and die. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of elderly people died because of a policy choice made out of spite, because he didn't want to have to admit that he took the help of Donald Trump. Let's just say what it is. That's exactly what happened in New York. And there's been no accounting for that. He wasn't run out for that. He was run out for getting handsy with too many women. This is the society we live in. And again, this is why people feel like things are out of control. There is no accountability for that. So yeah, we're not going to have amnesty. Apologize for that. Acknowledge things like this happen. Acknowledge that you put kids so far behind in school because you kept them out of school for 2 years when it was completely unnecessary. Why? To make sure that the bad orange man is out of the White House, to exert control over society, to do the bidding of the teachers' unions and not really try to protect kids and give them an education and do the bidding of parents. When there's an accounting for all of this and more, then maybe I'll think about saying, I accept your apology. But this whole idea that now we're just going to declare amnesty, oopsie, mistakes were made. No, never. And there's going to be a lot of anger in this country that will continue because so many that made all of these bad decisions, that did it on purpose, that seem to take glee in the suffering of their fellow Americans. No. There's no amnesty for any of that. I'm sorry. Zero.
Yeah, I'll say, like, in the early days of COVID, where we didn't know, it's like, I took precautions that, in hindsight seem a little bit silly. Now, granted, like, my wife was pregnant at the time, but, I was one of the people that would go to the grocery store, like, first thing in the morning, come back, wipe stuff down, make sure to throw my clothes into the washer right away. Because, like, God forbid I would, like, bring this terrible virus to my wife, while she's pregnant and stuff. But it's like there's a difference between making personal choices and things that only affect you in the name of just like ignorance and not knowing what the truth is, and forcing other people to do stuff, or using government force to crack down and tattling on neighbors and like all of the stuff that comes along with that whole laundry list of stuff that I read off that, the author of this article didn't didn't mention at all. So, I mean, Chris, it seems like there's a big difference for that. I can call, let bygones be bygones when it comes to us, like, acting silly and wearing, these cloth masks when we found out, later on they didn't work. But mandating other people and punishing other people for not doing that, to me, that's a step too far. What do you think about that, Chris?
Well, first of all, I don't want amnesty. I want accountability. I want the people that made these terrible decisions, everyone from Dr. Fauci to Governor Cuomo and Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom and all these people. They need to be held accountable for what they did, because they ruined people's lives. They ruined children's lives. These children are years behind where they should be in terms of their education, and not to mention all the social and emotional and psychological toll that they put on these kids telling them go sit in a room for 2 years and stare at a screen, don't have any sort of contact with people, knowing that, as Jim said, and Jim, that was an awesome summary of all this stuff, knowing that that was completely unnecessary, because they knew for a fact that this virus had almost no impact on kids. So just that alone, they should be held accountable for that. They have ruined people's lives. But not only that, Donnie, how about the fact that they're doing this about a week before the election? Because I've been watching some of these recent debates, and a lot of these blue governors are now saying, I didn't shut down schools. That never happened. I mean, the gaslighting is incredible, but they're trying to get away with it. So now, of course, people at the Atlantic and, their cronies on, in the left-wing media are going to try to say, yeah, they had good intentions, but they went a little overboard, but we didn't know how bad it was going to be. No, that's not true. They knew how bad it was, and they intentionally did it, as Jim said, and I believe this with all my heart, to make sure that Donald Trump did not get reelected. Because let's remember that when the George Floyd protests were happening, in the midst of all this, they said, "Oh, it's okay to go and protest for social justice causes." So, the science was just completely botched from the very beginning. They were using ends to justify the means, and I really, really hope that these people are held accountable, whether it's at the voting booth or hopefully, in court, where they should be held accountable, because they ruined people's lives, they killed people. And we're going to deal with the ramifications from this for decades. This is not a thing where it's like, oh, whoops, we made a little policy error. Sorry about that, everybody. No, this has fundamentally changed America for the worse.
Yeah, no doubt. One of these videos that's playing for our audio-only listeners is a woman at some establishment brandishing a bat at her customers over what I think was just like a face mask dispute or something. And it's just like the psychological torment that you put the entire country through cannot be understated, but is illustrated very well by that clip. Cameron, we only have a few minutes left, but I want your take on this article.
On this, I am trying to be patient and say, oh, I'm like you, Donnie. The hindsight's 2020. The science is what the science said, right? I'm trying to be gracious in that. But like Jim and like Chris, my patience wore thin real quick, because it wasn't so much that I felt they were reading the data wrong. It was the smugness. It was the self-righteousness with which they sought to overlord us. Prior to COVID, I don't think there's anybody on this call that didn't have some measure of respect and some measure of deference to public health officials. But what we saw during the COVID pandemic was, we saw these people who saw that, or who felt that they were our betters. And I think it's the gaslighting and that smugness that bothers us. You had, my favorite video was the one with the two old white women yelling at the black man in the elevator for not wearing a mask and saying, "We love black people." Well, that is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. That his race has nothing to do with whether he's wearing a mask or not. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. And so we had access to the same information that all these scientists did. And yet we saw that they weren't just fallible, but they are haunted by the same affliction in a thirst for or a human temptation for authority and power. And that's what it boils down to. And now they want to, they don't want to atone for it. They want amnesty.
Yeah, I want to bring up this message here, from this comment from Diane Selby here. It says, "How will we believe the CDC ever again?" And this is a part of a conversation that Jim and I actually had yesterday, which was that, at the beginning of all of this, again, when we didn't know, like, nobody had just this complete mistrust of the CDC. When Trump went up on stage with Fauci and they talked about that 2 weeks to slow the curve, 90% of people, 95% of people were like, all right, yeah, like, we get it. Better to be cautious. But like, that that trust in these institutions just deteriorated just on a constant basis from that point on, and all of this stuff that we're talking about led to that destruction of the trust in these institutions.
But we also know that from the very beginning, Dr. Fauci was hiding things and he was covering things up, and
we know that now.
Yeah, exactly. So that shows me that they knew at the very beginning that they were going to overhype this and they were going to pretend like it's much worse than it is. Dr. Fauci and all of them are complicit in this. And the really frustrating thing for me is even months into it, we had, Nancy Pelosi trapezing around with, no mask in a hair salon. We had Lori Lightfoot doing the same thing here. We had Gavin Newsom going to the French Laundry, sans mask, and with all his friends. So even after they knew, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for the first couple of weeks. Maybe they just, were being way too overcautious here. But months in, even years in, they were still doing this stuff, which shows that they have, malevolent intentions about this. And like Jim said, they wanted to inflict as much pain as possible. And that is just unacceptable.